CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Changes are picking up pace. Leadership in a multipolar world needs to catch up.
The U.S. hasn't wanted to lead in a while.
I think the WTO is weak right now.
Given powerful shifts in demographics, where is the smart money going?
Where you will have the young population.
And Asia is a region of entrepreneurs. It makes sense to have this strategy here.
So concentrate on companies that are making products and services for the Chinese population, particularly the middle class.
And with worries of a tech iron curtain, how will technology transform competition?
The most powerful law is technology diffusion. No one power can control technology.
We do have to recognize that over the long term, labor doesn't matter as much.
A global rate gives the risk money.
The best minds in business and policy in our New Economy Forum special, only on BizTalk, only on CGTN.
The U.S. hasn't wanted to lead in a while.
Welcome to our special edition of BizTalk at the New Economy Forum. I'm Cheng Lei in Yanqi Lake on the outskirts of Beijing. Now, the location and the theme of the forum are recognition of the shift in wealth eastwards. So how should you position for these changes, and what are the opportunities for you?
The long-term shift of economic power away from advanced economies is set to continue as emerging market countries boost their share of world GDP. By 2050, 6 of the 7 largest economies in the world could be emerging markets, according to PwC. How will the global order change? Who will be number one? And is a multipolar world order emerging?
The reality is that we are moving into this global multipolarity, and we have never had a system like that where actually every continent matters for the first time in history, and you have non-colonial relations between them. You know, when Africans and South Americans join the Belt and Road Initiative, they do so not because China forced them, right? So I think we have to stop governing our logic by historical analogy that comes from a very limited period of European history and applying that to the whole world. Now within that, Asia is extremely important. Asia is more than half the world population. Asia is half the world's GDP. Even Asia has multipolarity, right?
When the United States pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Japanese took leadership to get it done. 5 years ago, that never would have happened, right? I mean, you look at Macron and his desire to make a stronger Europe and get appointees for the European Commission that are much stronger than the previous group. That's significant. But I mean, if you and I are sitting here and talking about Japan and Germany and France and the New Economy Forum, it means we're not talking about the United States.
The U.S. has to once again lead globally. Countries in the world are not self-organizing. Leadership matters. American leadership has mattered for a very long time now, 3 generations. It isn't the only leader in the world, and it will not be the only leader in the world, but it cannot have no leadership interest. Get back to business. Get back to being a leader with no territorial aim, but with the notion that rule of law, predictability, consistency in global interaction is critical for stability.
When the developed countries are not doing well, they have spillover effects on the emerging markets and the developing world. Emerging markets, developing countries contribute almost 2/3 of global growth. China alone contributes about 25%. So some bright spots there in Africa. You know, we have a young demographic. And what we are focusing on is how can we make that demographic productive? because 2030, 2050, we are going to have the young population. You know, Asia will be aging, is already aging, or aging.
Very quickly.
And Europe is the same, and America's not so bad. Where you will have the young population, whereby, I think by 2030 or so, to 2050, 6% only of Africa's population will be 65 and overs. So it means we have a vastly young population. How do we make this productive? For me, this is a global public good. I think it's not just for Africa, but for the world. Even though people look at Africa and say a lot of poverty, no, I see a lot of hope, a lot of energy. It can drive growth in the world. And if people don't wake up and realize that, I think they'll be missing out.
An aging population could lead to a labor shortage and push up inflation, while those working may have to pay higher taxes and deter companies from making more investments. But countries can be aging ready, with help from immigration and innovation. So where are investors putting their money?
The United States is the best place in the world to invest, in my view, because of the rule of law, transparency, quality of the markets, etc. But the second best place, I would say, is China, because of the size of the population, the welcoming of private equity investors from outside, a kind of capitalist mind spirit that exists here, very creative people, good companies, good financial markets, many good things here. So I think this is a place where we believe very important to invest.
Your dozens of deals in China span a whole number of industries. Which ones look most promising to you over the next 5 years?
Our firm and other firms will concentrate on companies that are making products and services for the Chinese population, particularly the middle class. I think the export economy is still very important, but as China switches to a more consumer-oriented domestic economy, rather than export-oriented economy, I think companies that cater to those services will be very important. For example, healthcare. In the United States, healthcare is now almost 20% of the GDP of our country. It's not quite as big a percentage of the economy in China, but it will be. As people get wealthier, what they want to do...
half. I think it's something like 8%. Or
8%. When I worked in the White House in the 1970s, it was roughly 7% of the GDP of the United States was healthcare. Now it's about 20%.
You said the best countries to invest in were the US and China. Then where?
I would take a developed market country and an emerging market country. The developed market countries that I think are good to invest are Canada, Japan, Australia. I think those economies are going to do pretty well, and Japan has some really strong things going for it now. Emerging market economies I think are very good are India and Brazil. India is growing quite nicely, not as high as it was a couple years ago, but still a very large population. Brazil has clearly had its ups and downs. It's had a recession for quite a while, but I think the bottom has been hit, and I think the Brazilian economy is going to come back, and it's also a very large population.
We've anticipated this. I mean, we've been focusing on the emerging markets for a while. We have a very unique organization as a bank. When I came in, I created regional divisions, and the results have been really, really excellent. When I arrived, we had $130 billion under management. We have 220 now. So we brought in 90 billion in 3 years, which in Asia is a very good performance. Very focused on the ultra high net worth. And Asia is a region of entrepreneurs. So it makes sense to have this strategy here. Last year, I talked about the new assets we're collecting. 40% of the new assets in Asia came from the investment bank, not the private bank. We now have investment bankers bringing business to a private bank, thanks to their connection to the entrepreneurs. So it works very well. This integrated approach of saying before you had an investment bank that was basically ignoring the wealth management, and wealth management that was ignoring the investment bank, of telling them, look, you belong together, you can work together, has been very good, and again focused on emerging markets.
I think private equity is still based mostly in the West. I would say it's spread now to the other parts of the world, but still private equity in China is still relatively modest compared to private equity in the United States.
So now we're talking about a multipolar world going into the future. How do you think investors should find balance in this multipolar world? Do they have to pick sides?
The most important thing when you invest is not losing what you have. And the best way not to lose what you have is to take relatively conservative positions and diversify. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't think you're a genius because you made money in area A that you're going to make money investing in area B or C. So diversify what you have, try many different things, don't be tied up in any one stock, any one industry, any one area, any one country. I think investors should try to get reasonable rates of return, but not heroic rates of return. If you try for reasonable rates of return, and you'll probably be okay.
Set of rules, which hopefully ultimately will help filter up to the WTO level.
Income inequality is a growing problem in the United States, and I would say in many Western economies.
When the balance of power changes so much that it's no longer aligned with the institutions at all.
Governance models around the world are being challenged as inequality becomes a glaring problem. Is there a one-size-fits-all model, or should there be a menu of best practices to choose from? Current institutions and agreements founded after the World War II need to catch up to today's reality. The World Trade Organization, for one, is under pressure as members increasingly turn to bilateral and regional free trade agreements, posing the question to it and other institutions, where is the path of reform?
So after World War II, we set up these institutions, the United States, its allies. Okay, well, now we're in 2019. The institutions don't change very much. But the balance of power has changed dramatically. And when the balance of power changes so much that it's no longer aligned with the institutions at all, institutions start to break. They don't work so well. That's when you get a geopolitical recession. Now, it's very hard to create new institutions when you have old ones that are very sticky. So what you do in that environment is you try to find other ways around the institutions. Public-private partnerships. Why are the people here at the New Economy Forum, for example?
I think the WTO is weak right now. The agreements that exist in the WTO are old. They're in desperate need of updating, not only because of U.S. action against the dispute settlement system, but also because the agreements themselves don't address the major issues between countries any longer. And so the WTO is not in a position, really, to adequately discipline China or the United States when they engage in behavior antithetical to global open trade.
The issue is, how do we make them more effective so that they are not, as you say, becoming increasingly marginalized? Look, we need a lot of resources to develop. If you look at infrastructure alone, we need $6 trillion a year globally. How is that going to come? It's not from governments, but these multilateral institutions working as a system can really give the risk management tools and instruments, the guarantees that can leverage private sector resources to help us get more money for infrastructure. This is critical, especially in developing countries. So that whole global governance, they are relevant. They are not doing as well as they should. But there is hope for them to do much, much better.
But I don't see any impetus by global leaders, the global community, to do anything about that.
At the WTO level, the impetus is quite limited. But if you look beneath that, at the various regional and sub-regional arrangements that people are negotiating, China's a good example with RCEP. The US at one point had been in TPP and should certainly rejoin. These arrangements are in part designed to facilitate a new set of rules, which hopefully ultimately will help filter up to the WTO level and change that organization from the bottom up, rather than engaging in these very large rounds of negotiations, which are rather top-down, which don't produce any outcomes at all.
Capitalism creates prosperity, But pure capitalism puts power into the hands of owners, widening the wealth gap. The response has been social unrest leading to rising populism in many countries. Does the answer lie in sustainable capitalism?
Income inequality is a growing problem in the United States, and I would say in many Western economies. It's not only income inequality that's a problem, it's social mobility. Many people at the bottom of the economic strata don't think they have a chance to rise to the top. Right now, the model of capitalism in the West is being challenged by some who think that it doesn't produce enough income equality. And I think there should be a fresh look at many things that can be done to make income inequality less of a problem.
Average American thinks the American dream doesn't apply to them anymore. They think the system is rigged against them. And they have good reason to think that. So America is right now really struggling with to what degree representative democracy and free market capitalism, as practiced in the United States, is still a system that works for the average American.
Western countries, Western liberal democracies are really in a tight spot. But let's not hold the US and the UK as synonymous with the West, right? There's a particular Anglo-American capitalist model that isn't backed by social democratic welfare state kinds of institutions. There's a very good reason, and that is the reason why you see the US and the UK with Trump and Brexit, but you don't see Canada falling into that trap. It's certainly not because of the Western system being broken, because there are plenty of Western systems that work just fine. It's not about a great civilizational flaw. It's not a flaw in democracy itself. No, it's individual countries making either correct choices or wrong choices.
You know, I just came from Tokyo, and their idea is society 5.0, not the fourth industrial revolution, which doesn't work for a lot of people, but society 5.0, a more inclusive capitalism that isn't all about growth, but instead is about making sure that you're not leaving people behind, making sure the social safety net works. But, you know, the problem is the average American doesn't support capitalism because the average American doesn't have capital. If you don't have capital, capitalism is hard. You know, I grew up in the projects. My mother didn't have any money. She didn't care about capitalism. She just wanted to make sure that she had the ability to ensure a better life for her kids, for me and my brother. So I think that we do need to really take a deeper look at how we ensure that our countries don't just work for a small number of people, but actually are seen as representative institutions.
I've been hearing, leaders tell me about their, desire to follow the China model in Africa and the Middle East for about 15 years. I've always found that the China model is indeed just the China model only for China. There's only one China. And other countries need to really pick and choose from a menu of lessons from around the world. So you learn certain lessons from Singapore around urban planning or public housing. You learn about digital policy and innovation and startup ecosystems from the United States. You learn about energy transformation towards grid parity from Germany. And that's the way the real world works in smart countries, right? So even a poor country today can easily, without even having to travel, can go on the internet and understand what countries have done right and how they can apply it to themselves.
But can we avoid splitting the world into two separate tribes based on different data?
The powerful law is technology diffusion. No one power can control technology.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Technology. Is it an accelerator of social injustice, or can it be a solution to our planetary challenges? How do we make technology work for everyone? And can there be a global regulatory body on technology as for trade?
Tech supremacy is the main battlefield in the long-term China-US relationship. The US has created the most valuable technology companies in the world and has tech research underpinned by top institutions. But China has the world's largest internet population, creating massive data troves, ambitious tech entrepreneurs, and pro-tech policies. How valid are concerns of a tech iron curtain?
The problem with the technology Cold War is it means that we will want to destroy the Chinese system. See, on trade, even though we're fighting, we don't want to destroy the Chinese on trade because we know it hurts us. It hurts our farmers. It hurts the consumers. The Chinese, when they hit us back, they know it hurts them. We don't want it. We want to work together. But now we're seeing that in technology, in some of the most important parts of the 21st century economy, we want the Chinese to fail. That's a very bad place to be. When human beings enter into an environment where it's important for our own interest to destroy the other, that doesn't go well. So, we need to create systems and structures that incent us towards cooperation. And my idea for a World Data Organization, bolstered with an intergovernmental panel on artificial intelligence that provides ground truth, is precisely to start creating more structure that aligns human beings towards productive and cooperative behavior.
The most powerful law is technology diffusion. No one power can control technology. So even the way in which people talk about a world in which one country is the dominant technology power is itself ridiculous, because technology is a greater force than whatever that power is, whether it's America or China. And you can look at AI. Let's go back to nuclear weapons, right? How many countries today have nuclear weapons? About 10. So were the great powers of the 1940s, the United States and the Soviet Union, able to contain the spread of nuclear technology? Obviously not, right? The same is true for every other kind of technology in the world. So technology spreads faster than anyone can control it, and that happens even more today than ever before. So this is why I don't think that we're moving towards a bipolar new iron curtain of technology, not at all.
But can we avoid splitting the world into two separate tribes based on different data? Because we need that. Right now, the direction we're heading is within 5 to 10 years, children around the planet will have completely different data ecosystems, whether they're aligned with Beijing or with the United States. And they won't learn from each other. They won't talk to each other. We already see that kids are spending more time on their devices than talking with other kids. If we get to the 5G environment where everything around an individual is a data ecosystem, and that is increasingly aligned to one set of standards and norms and filters as opposed to the other, we're dividing and separating. Even in my own country, the United States, we already see through data ecosystems that can't talk to each other, that hate the other.
I would resent to see the day you have one world, two systems. Near term is definitely present more business risk for both sides. Longer term, I'm worried about innovation, because as I said, for all the reasons I outlined, right? Innovation really needs cooperation and cross-border, work. But on the other hand, the silver lining is, amidst all of that, China will be in a way be forced to invest and focus on some of the fundamental, research as well as the technologies historically being able to source from outside China. So longer term is actually good for China.
The constant is change. According to Oxford Economics, up to 20 million manufacturing jobs worldwide will be lost to automation by 2030. Gardner says AI-related jobs will reach 2 million net new positions in 2025. How do economies turn tech disruption into opportunities?
We have much less of a so-called digital divide than we've had before, because the cost of deploying and sharing technology, mobile phones, broadband internet, even basic technologies around medical care and so forth, are all proliferating. So the cause of unrest, whether it's domestic or international, is not the inadequate distribution of technology, right? It's actually the domestic distribution of wealth. about 10 years ago is when domestic inequality became a worse problem, a bigger problem than international inequality, right? So I think that's actually a very old conversation when people say that it's about the digital divide and this divide and that divide. No, it's actually within countries, not north versus south.
In those countries, how do you then ensure that with the oncoming of more advanced technology displacing jobs, that it's not going to create more social unrest?
So that depends on where, right? Because right now in Asia, technology is creating more jobs than it's destroying, because it actually requires a lot of skilled professionals to adapt and develop and innovate technologies, to deploy them, to install them. And we're talking about everything from 5G and telecommunications industry to solar panels, right? And new buildings and so forth. All of that actually creates jobs in Asia. And by and large, we see that technology does create more jobs than it destroys for now. If it's going to start destroying lots of jobs, then it's a social policy issue, right? And a governance issue. You don't blame the technology, right? You blame the governance. Which governments are taxing corporations, right? And redistributing that wealth? Which countries are investing in education and human capital to train their workforce to adapt to new technologies? Those are questions, again, of governance. So you should not be blaming the technology.
That's not the kind of problem that I see in the technology space where it's splitting. But we do have to recognize that over the long term, labor doesn't matter as much. It is really becoming disintermediated from capital.
So what happens to Africa?
Well, I mean, labor is really cheap in Africa. So, I mean, I would worry less about that than I would worry about what happens in China, what happens in Mexico, what happens in the more advanced emerging markets. But still, all of these places in the world that have grown up on the back of manufacturing labor and service labor, if you don't need as much labor, then you're going to have to find much more creative ways to work with these people. You're going to have a lot of people that are going to have gig economy. So they'll work part-time. They don't need full-time labor. Well, dealing with a society with a lot of people that can work 30 hours a week as opposed to 50 is an easier fix than universal basic income for everyone. But to do that, you need data that actually shows you how many people in your society are working but part-time, and how do you take care of them? What kind of benefits do they get? What kind of legal protections? We need to change the legal structures that actually adapt to and reflect a new working environment, and that we don't have yet.
So what are you most interested in right now in terms of new technologies and new business models?
We're still super interested in AI, big data, the B2B, related application and services, and we're super excited about healthcare, both in terms of services, medical technology, as well as some areas of the new drug discoveries.
So how do you capture the opportunities globally from megatrends like urbanization, like artificial intelligence?
One of the trends is automotive electrification. So as we look at the automobiles moving towards electrical powertrains, maybe even a bigger trend is all of the electronics going into the automobile. This is a place for 3M innovation. We see opportunities in the trends for advanced wound care. Maybe another very different marketplace, but an opportunity for 3M solutions with the aging demographics and diseases like diabetes. There's a demand for difficult to treat wounds, solutions to solve difficult to treat wounds. We see market trends around safety products and worker safety, roadway and traffic safety, all opportunities and priority growth platform for us to invest in our innovation.
The quicker pace of change is testing the adaptability of leaders in business and politics. Visionaries are venturing into new geographies, forging new alliances, investing in new technologies and adjusting structures, economic, social and political. Are you change ready?